Good afternoon, grinders. Welcome to a special edition of RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you're gonna follow me on Twitter, hit that thumbs up button and you're way in the door. We're gonna be talking about taxes. I know it seems like a boring subject, but I mean it is March 6th as of this recording. Yeah, many people have already gotten their tax documents from DraftKings, FanDuel, Prize Picks, sports books, sweepstakes sites, wherever you're getting your tax documents. And it's very important, April 15th or whenever, obviously you could file an extension. You could do stuff like that. So we got Mike Fierstein from DFSaccounting.com to answer all of your potential questions about taxes. And I believe I'm not an accountant. I'm not a tax professional. I'm supposed to say legally.
Yeah.
Don't use this show as financial
Right.
advice or consult your tax professional. Go to dfsaccounting.com if you want to talk to Mike himself. But just because we answer a question here, if you file your taxes and somehow get into trouble, don't send the IRS a link to the show and say, well, they told me it was okay.
No, that's a good point, right, Jordan? Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, we're smack dab in the middle of tax season, right? By now, your listeners and everyone out there should have gotten predominantly all their tax documents received. You're probably sifting through it, saying, "What the heck is going on?" Right? I'm getting a 1099 miscellaneous. The amounts are a little bit, are off based on what I have. What do I do with this? I have losses in one operating and then in wins in the other. So ultimately at the end of the day with this conversation, let's shed some light as to, the gray area or the dizziness of tax season. And ultimately, we'll be talking about generalities, right? And, each person needs to take this information and see how it's applicable to their tax situation, because everyone's tax situation is different.
Well, one of the first questions that a lot of people ask, because I see it on Reddit even when it comes to taxes, is people would say, I got a 1099. I got a form. DraftKings sent me something. I never withdrew from DraftKings. Like I put in $500. I have $2,000 and I never withdrew or anything. Why am I getting a 1099 for $1,500? Can you explain how like income is reported I mean, we're also talking about sports betting as well, but just in general, that doesn't matter when you deposit or when you withdraw or any of that. Does any of that matter?
Right, exactly. And in the way DraftKings and FanDuel and the big operators, especially in the DFS space, it does not matter, right? And that's just an idea and a concept that people have to realize, right? These accounts are an extension of your bank account, and really how they're recording it is what we call the net profit method, and that's the correct method, right? What actually happened in your accounts while you're playing throughout the whole year, and the net result of that is going to be on your 1099 miscellaneous, whether or not you withdraw into your bank account. So that is how that is reported on the DFS side.
Right, and that's good for you because your losses are already being deducted from your wins. So, like if earlier in the year of January, you won a GPP for $10,000, and then over the course of the entire calendar year, you lost $9,000, you just get a 1099 for $1,000 rather than something for 10,000, and then you have to deduct 9,000 from your, the deductions from your taxes.
Yes,
that's a much better tax situation for you. We'll talk about where that doesn't apply, but you would prefer it be net profit than, well, depending on when you withdraw, deposit, and you have to deduct $1 contest from your taxes. Like that puts you in there's much more work involved when it comes to that.
Right, exactly. They're basically, doing the work for you, right? Obviously, you want to check your number, and if you're playing DFS on a daily basis, right, and you find yourself being a professional, right, and what have you, then I highly suggest keeping track of your wins and losses. We typically see there is some variances, right, based on what's a 1099 miscellaneous and what people have, and so that's always good practice to keep track of it. But ultimately on the DFS side, they're making it what is called an annual session, right? And some of you who gamble, and we could probably touch into that a little bit later on what that concept of sessions is. So on the DFS, it's one annual session, that you are getting reported the net amount.
Well, I mean, as someone that does personally keep my own records as well, sometimes, and this happens to me every year to some degree, where the 1099 I get from a site doesn't match the records that I have. Like, if I export my CSVs and everything, and I throw it into a site like RotoTracker or any of these like bankroll management things, it'll show that like, oh, I'm up $15,700 this year, and then I get a 1099 for 16,300, and I'm like, well, why is it higher? Because I did they screw up or anything, or could there be a reason for that?
Yeah, right. And I don't, especially the last couple of years. I mean, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago when FanDuel and DraftKings came about, and everyone was, now you were seeing a lot of discrepancies. But they've done a good job tidying up how they report, and on the website they should, and I believe they do tell you how they report the 1099, how they calculate that. Ultimately, what's happening is it's probably to do with the bonuses that you received, right, in the crowns and things of that nature, that technically, it is perceived as income, right? A lot of times when you have, free entry fees associated with going into a contest, ultimately, if you had to pay your fees, the net, you deduct or you report the net result of that. So if you pay $5 you get a $5 free entry into a contest and you win $100, well, then you win $100. But if you had to pay $5 to get into that net amount that you win is not 100, it's 95. So if you're getting a lot of those, there's going to be, some discrepancies. And if it's a big amount, then I would reach out to those sites and say, hey, I'd like to see how you calculate them. They should be getting back to you.
And if you do need to do that, especially, some of these sites are not that, they don't send you a document at, the end of January. Sometimes they wait until March 1st. You can request these sites give you an amended 1099, but the key point there, I just as someone with experience that has done that before,
right?
That make sure you still what should you do? Let's say it's a very big discrepancy, right? And let's just use an exaggerated example. Let's say I show in my records that I profited 55,000, and then they send me a 1099 for 85,000, which is like $30,000 off. Being that like the amended 1099 may not even get to me by tax filing season, should I file my taxes with my own because I have a paper trail for the IRS, right. So should I file it based on what they say or based what I say? And then how does that get rectified? Like, should I default? Here's basically the main question, Mike. Should I default to paying more taxes and then just end up getting it returned to me? Or do I, since I have my own paper trail, I just file my taxes based on what I have?
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's a loaded question too, right? There's a lot of different parts associated with that. So, all right, say for instance, you got a 1099 that's a big discrepancy. You're showing 80,000, but really in your records, you keep detailed records, it's $50,000. The main issue is that 1099 that you received is a document that got submitted to the IRS. And say what you say about the IRS, they have a computer that's in there that will automatically tie your tax return with any documents that was submitted to them. So to answer your question, yes, I would put that $80,000 on your tax return because that is what they're looking for. If you don't do that and there's a discrepancy, say you put 50,000, you will almost 100% get a notice saying, hey, we see that you made $80,000 from this site, and you only showed 50,000. Where is this income, right? To then answer the other questions, right? Hopefully you can go back and amend that 1099 and hopefully they play ball, right? And so that process does take time. So you do have, what I would suggest, you do have the ability to file an extension, right? You mentioned that at the beginning of the show. So an extension will be filed, right? It's on April 15th. If you can't file your tax return, you would file an extension, but beware, it is just an extension to file. It is not an extension to pay, okay? And so if you have this big outstanding balance, this item that needs to be rectified, then yes, I would suggest filing an extension. Your accountant or yourself should calculate what you owe, right? Or what you might owe. And if you do, then I suggest making a payment, right? They're called extension payments, because what happens is, and I get this a lot, people forget to make that payment, or they don't make that payment and they think they're good. And really what happens is the clock is running. Now, if you owe money to the IRS, they look at it as a loan. So you owe that money, they're going to charge you penalties and interest. So if you're able to amend the 1099, it might take time. Get an extension, and if applicable, process an extension payment.
And you could always amend the 1040 later. And if you pay too like if you paid too much to the IRS, like you will get a refund. You will just like amend your tax return, and you'll.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like they're going to hold. I mean, it's not like if you paid $3,000-$4,000 too much because of the discrepancy or for whatever reason, extension or something, like you'll get that back. It's not like, well, they're not just going to keep it, right?
Yeah, of course, right. You'll get that back, but obviously you want to. The amending the return is your last line of defense, right? Because even if you're able to amend it online, which they've done a really good job, the IRS, to allow people to do that, it still takes time. So that's what I'm saying. If you're in this kind of area that you're waiting to hear back from your amended 1099, take as long as you can before you file, because once you file and you want to fix it, now you're gonna be into the amended process, which could take months and months and months. And without getting into any details, as you know, the IRS right now is on the chopping block for people. So there might not even be anybody there to process the return, right? And look at it, because it's a more manual process. It's not just a computer calculating that amended return.
I want to talk about a common situation that happens in DFS, and we'll talk about the sports betting stuff combined a little, because that's handled a little bit differently. But yeah. DFS, and I want to say DFS also is Underdog and Prize Picks, and some of those like in between type of sites are still considered like DFS. You'll get a 1099 from Prize Picks. You'll get a 1099, a net profit, annual session type of document from them. So that's included in all this. But what happens? Okay, let's say I go into my Roto Tracker. It's like, okay, I made $50,000 this year, right? I show $50,000 in profit, but like a lot of it came from one site. A lot of it's like, oh, well, I won a big GPP on DraftKings, but it turns out that I actually lost $5,000 on FanDuel, and I lost $2,000 on Prize Picks, and I lost $4,000 on Underdog, but I made $62,000 on DraftKings, which nets out to $50,000. But all the sites that I lost money, they're not sending me a form for a negative amount. It's just DraftKings saying, here's $62,000. But even though you lost $12,000 the other places, like, am I allowed to can I show my personal records and can I deduct those losses from the other DFS sites from the winnings of the one that I did win money from?
Right. And the answer is yes, but it's not as easy as that. It's a little bit more complicated. First off, this is a great reason why if you should do your own records and prepare your own records, right? Because if you're in a loss position, you're not going to get any documents, right? And you're going to want to maximize that. So a couple years back, I think in 2020 or 2021, right? The big argument was DFS considered gambling or not, right? And it was a big split between the two prior to 2020 or 2021. I forget which specific date. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there was a position that the IRS took on DFS, which basically said we're considering gambling income, right? And just changed the whole dynamics of that. So our position is that DFS is in the same situation as gambling income, the same tax rules, right? So that being said, yes, you could deduct your DFS losses because you can deduct your gambling losses as well. Now, those losses are going to be placed as an itemized deduction on your Schedule A. Okay, so the $12,000 that you listed, you would put as a gambling loss, quote unquote. Obviously, it's from DFS, but you would call it a gambling loss. And then your DFS winnings would then be, the $62,000 that you won. I think you said from FanDuel. So now, you can deduct it, but they're in two different locations.
And depending on, let's give the situation, like, it's not me where I'm doing this primarily, as part of a business, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, that's right. That's a big,
like the small time person.
right.
So let's say you're not playing for thousands upon thousands of dollars, and let's say you get a 1099 from DraftKings for $1,000, and you lost money on it's $400 on FanDuel. Let's say you lost $1,000 combined in all the other places, right? So like a little here, a little there, but you have a 1099 for DraftKings for $1,000, and you want to go, well, technically it's $0. I want to deduct those losses from the winnings. If you have a normal job, you have W-2 income from some full-time job or whatever. Does there come a point where it's better to just pay the tax on the $1,000 and take your standard deduction rather than itemize everything? Or is there a line where can you do? Because the thing is that I'm assuming, remember, I'm not a tax professional, that once you itemize this on Schedule A, you're itemizing everything. Like you should be itemizing like everything and not taking your standard deduction.
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? So with the itemizing the standard, you're going to take the greater out of the two. And then with Trump's tax plan back in 2018, he increased your standard deduction. So your floor is a lot higher to beat, right? So based on your tax situation, you may never even itemize, right? If you don't own a home or what have you, or don't have large, charitable donations, and hopefully you're not really, really sick. And so that's the crux of the situation, is that you hear that, yeah, you could deduct your gambling losses or DFS losses, but they're itemized deductions. So if those losses, like you said, in this situation is $1,000, and that's the only itemized deduction you might have, and it's below the standard deduction, then yeah, you don't get that. And that's the, what stinks about this is that you are limited, your losses are limited if you're taking the standard deduction. So no, you're gonna take whatever the highest is in your situation, and a lot of times people are just gonna have to pay the $1,000 that was reported on the 1099 miscellaneous.
How about as far as like expenses? So obviously we talked about the standard versus itemized. Obviously, if it's only a small amount, you're probably taking the standard deduction anyway. But let's say we're talking now, you won $100,000 and you 6-figure wins profit in the calendar year 2024. How about like I pay $100 a month to RotoGrinders. I pay like all the tools that I use, and hey, I watch MMA on ESPN Plus. Can I take that? Like what does it come if you're going to itemize and it's not, and you're not, like, this is not your business, it's still on your personal return? Can you still take some of those, because technically those are expenses that in order to make that money, how do you handle that type of stuff if it's just your personal, it's just me, my SSN normal, like that's most people. That's not me personally, but that's most people. How should people handle that? They have a big DFS win, but obviously they pay a whole bunch of money to a bunch of stuff in order to that helps them get that money.
Right. And it again, another great question, right? So for the recreational gambler, right, there's not much that you can do. I mean, the laws specifically state that the only deduction or loss you can is the loss of is gambling losses, or the cost to wager the cost to wager that bet. So typically, basically, it cancels out any other subscription-based or analytical tools that you may have, right? So at that point, then what we like to do is say, all right, let's take a look at how material expenses are, right? And let's take a look at how long and how many hours you're putting into this endeavor. And maybe there's a path forward to have you as a professional or as a business, right? And get it out of the recreational. That's how we kind of operate, right? But unfortunately, yeah, if you're a recreational gambler and you just took a big hit and a big win, then there's not much you can do except deduct your gambling losses as an itemized deduction, and hope those gambling losses are get you above the standard deduction so you can actually use them.
Now, what stops me from then why can't I file as a business? So let's say, can I set up, for instance, can I go on LegalZoom and set up as LLC? I mean, I'm using like the very like just random person going like, I'm going to set up a Jordan Cooper DFS LLC, pay my $150 for the filing and all that type of stuff. Obviously, at DFS accounting, you could. We'll talk about how you could help do a lot of that type of stuff.
That's right.
What prevents? Why can't I just like, this is my, even though I have a full-time job or something, or I do other stuff, but this is my business. And then it's like, well, I have a home office. I have all the normal like business expenses that if you weren't just a recreational gambler, why can't I just do that and just start deducting like everything that comes in, anything that's related to DFS and just start deducting stuff across the board?
Yeah, and the quick answer is yes, you can. You can go on the LegalZoom and set up an LLC and report yourself as a professional gambler, professional DFS player. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that, right? Now,
can you do that Mike? Can I literally do that right now?
Yeah, you could do that right now. Now, for 2024 will be difficult, but for an LLC, but ultimately at the end of the day, you could place that activity on what is called your Schedule C, right? You'll be just considered what is called a sole proprietor. And you could report that on your Schedule C is where you would, and that's an additional schedule on your 1040, which is your personal tax return. And you could put that there 100%, right? Now there's levels to this, and the more formal you get, the better you position yourself as a business, as a for-profit business, right? So an LLC is a great start, really simple and easy to do. Go on LegalZoom, right? And then, based on your tax situation, right? I've had help people position themselves into an S corporation. But not to get too technical, to bring it back a little bit is this. I don't want to just say, hey, yeah, you could just set up a business, right? There are parameters associated with this, and there's certain things that people need to know, right? Unfortunately, with DFS and gambling, there's been a lot of court cases and tax rulings, right? That the IRS have positioned themselves as saying, hey, this is a recreational hobby, right? So to get above and beyond that and say, hey, this is for professional, it's a high watermark to do, right? You really got to show that, listen, I am doing a lot of research. I am placing my bets. I'm entering in the contest. I'm putting in 35 to 40 hours a week. Right? This is a for-profit business. I am putting in a material amount of money into my bankroll. So that way, it is, if something were to happen, this is my financial scenario or situation would change. The amount of money that I'm having is material, right? You're not just making $2,000, $3,000, but you're making $100,000, if not more, and you're living off of this, right? So those are the parameters and sort of ways that you have to support this position. Now, you don't just send this to the IRS, right? What you do is you keep records, right? You keep calendar, you keep, the CSV file that you get year end to show the volume. You set up your own bank account, right? Your business account where you start funneling your expenses and so forth. You make it look like you are in business, because that's what we're presenting to the IRS. And the worst thing that we would want is the IRS to come back and audit you. And we've had cases where we had to defend our clients under audit, right? So I don't want to just to say, yeah, you could go turn from a recreational to a professional, DFS player overnight. You have to stay true to yourself and the situation if you want to do that.
Right. Like, for instance, I'm an S corporation, and I pay myself I have a quarterly payroll. So that's like I'm paid as an employee. So I get a W-2 from my own business for my salary, which has to be a reasonable. I mean, my accountant says it has to be,
you got it.
Right. Reasonable type of thing. Right. And then also yearly minutes, because we do have a board, even though I'm the only board. Like, it has to, you have to set it up like it's a business. And this is the reason.
Yes,
this is the reason why someone like you, Mike, DFSaccounting.com, like, trust me, I'm not the one doing all this work. I have my own accountant I've been working with for 10, 15 years that
sounds like you're doing a good job.
That understands the tax law, even though, they were never in the DFS and gambling space. But once I explained everything, they're like, okay, this is how we're going to set it up. We're going to give you S Corp. I went from an LLC back in my old business to an S Corp election. We're going to do and then the accountant sends me an envelope every quarter that has a whole bunch of documents in it. It said sign here, send a check there, do this there. Everything. This was electronically filed. Here's my invoice, obviously the accountant's invoice, and like I'll get a 10. I get a W-2 from my own business sent mailed to me with my name on it, even though it's my business. Like that's how you set up a business. And once you do that, if you're making high 5, 6 figures, whatever, even if you have a full-time job, like setting that all up, like saves you so much headache, and also saves you a lot on, especially if you're, you don't have to put everything on a Schedule C. You're just like the business everything's funneled through the business, and what ends up happening is that you get a W-2 for your salary, and you get a K-1 for your, anything that's I try to make, Mike, I'm assuming. I try to make my salary, even though I don't know what my salary is for the year, because every year is going to be different for this type of business.
Right.
I try to guesstimate, every quarter, like how much, and then there's also implications on how much the max you can pay for Social Security. I just want to highlight. Since I've had these conversations, that it's extremely important at this point, if you're going to do all of this, to consult a tax professional. Do not try to do this on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And in the scenario that you outlined, right, is definitely a common one too, but also, one that we don't take lightly, right? And so a lot of the calls, right, we go on 30-minute intro calls and free consultations, what we'll get to later. But I always tell people, you got to be long in the tooth for this, right? I don't want to set up this business and get you filing an LLC tax as an S corporation if this is just going to be a one and done thing, right? Do you see yourself continuing with DFS or sports betting and putting a material amount of time into this endeavor for the next 2-3 years? Because if so, then we could go down this road. Let's set you up. Let's make sure you're done right. Let's get a reasonable comp. We have a software that does reasonable comp analysis. So then we get you squared away. We talk about your retirement aspirations, right? Do you want to put money aside for retirement planning? Set you up with what is a SEP IRA or solo 401k, whatever it may be. And we really set this up as, like you said, a business and so forth. So that is definitely like a top tier approach, right? It's a more formal approach. You go from sole proprietor, on your Schedule C, just messing around, a couple of Excel files, you're using your personal credit card, you're pulling it all together, to an LLC, which we would suggest, setting up a business account and taking out a business credit card, to then LLC tax as an S corp. One of the reasons why, and I want to go back a little bit, is why you set up an S corp is that when you're an LLC or a sole proprietorship and you report on this Schedule C, you're considered self-employed. Okay, what does self-employed mean? Meaning you're paying payroll tax. What's payroll tax? Payroll tax is Social Security and Medicare that you get paid. So if you're a W-2, that's automatically paid out of your paycheck, right? But that's only one half. You have an employee portion, and then you have an employer portion. So when you're self-employed, you have to pay the employee portion and the employer portion, which is 15.3%. So long story short is that I'm very specific. I'm very intentional when I tell people, hey, yeah, be a professional, and we'll put this on your Schedule C. Because if I do that and they don't have enough expenses, and based on their tax situation, I might put them in a situation where they're paying an additional 15.3% tax, and they're actually paying more tax. And that's counterintuitive what we're trying to do. So again, the beginning of all this, everybody's tax situation is different, right? And so everything that we're outlining now and what you said was a great scenario. It's specific to each individual. But yeah, we could set you up and we could definitely do it.
And this doesn't matter, like if you set up a business, I'm putting it in quotes, it's a real business. Like you could still have a full-time job. Like this is like, you're not filing as like a professional gambler. You just have a business that's what, like you could have a full-time job and also have 18 businesses. I mean, like it's not something that you have to do like, well, I have a job that pays $70K a year, that I have a 401k and all that type of stuff. I can't do this because this, even though you win a ton of money in DFS every year, you're like, well, I just put it on my tax return as normal. Like you could still do it. It's not like once you set up this business, you have to quit your full-time job. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, people moonlight all the time, right? I mean, that's how entrepreneurs get started. They set up your own business, and listen, I think it's a pain in the butt, right? I'm not really happy about it that the threshold of being a professional or being a full-time DFS gambler is so high, right? I mean, I play softball and the umps are able to the umps are able to report that moonlighting on their Schedule C. Everyone knows it. And so everyone does it. Everyone has that moonlighting capabilities and what have you. But ultimately, with this situation in this industry, in this arena, you just want to tidy it up, right? You want to dot the I's and cross the T's, because they are looking. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? Of the audits that we had to defend, 100% of it was on the DFS side, and 100% of it was because they were reporting on the Schedule C. Okay, the Schedule C is a form that the IRS scrutinizes a little bit more than other forms. Now, we're still talking about 1%, 2%, 3%, and gosh knows what's going to happen now if there's anybody even in there to audit you, right? It's still a very, very low percentage, but it's there. And what we try and do is we want to mitigate that risk, right? And so if Schedule C is the way to go based on whatever situation, that's fine. But let's make sure you're doing X, Y, and Z, so that way, if push comes to shove, we will be able to defend yourself. And not to toot my own horn, we're batting 1,000 on defending any audit. So we've gotten a no change on all of them, and we're fairly confident in how we set up our clients. And if there is an inquiry, we could successfully defend against it.
And that's at dfsaccounting.com. There's another document that people may have gotten that they may not know the difference, right? Then they may have gotten it from the same entity. You may have gotten this. Yeah. You may have gotten two documents from DraftKings, right? The W-2G. So what's the difference between a 1099 and a W-2G? Because obviously DFS, like you said before, it's an annual session. They're going by a net profit method. But sports books, they don't, like, if I go and I bet $100 a day on DraftKings, and I go 100, and at the end of the year, I'm up $500. Like, they don't send me truthfully, they don't send me anything. But I mean, let's say I hit a big, on Caesars this year, I hit a SGP that paid like 350 to 1 or something. I got a tax document of a W-2G for $13,000. What's the difference from a perspective of 1099 versus W-2Gs, and can talk about it when it comes to like how you report that on your personal 1040 versus if it was your business.
Right, 100%. Yeah, and there's a big difference between the W-2G, and honestly, this just compounds the not the complexity, but just how everything's done in the gambling space is completely ridiculous. And so the W-2G, the way that works, right? And you had a number out there, and you said 350 to 1. And that's a big important number, because a W-2G, especially with the sports books, their parameter is that they will not send you a W-2G unless your wager is your win is 300 to 1 odds and pays over $600. So the scenario that you detailed, that would allow you to do a W-2G, but that's not the end. What happens is the W-2G is only a snapshot in time. It's only designated for that one wager. I do believe like FanDuel and DraftKings will include, if there is a W-2G situation, they would include the net result of all the wagers that happen in that day. But either way, it's a snapshot in time. So it doesn't show the whole picture of your gambling situation. So you might have won this $13,000, but your wagers and your winnings were $80,000. So you only have one document that's 13. The IRS doesn't want you just to show 13,000. They want you to show your $80,000 in wagers and wins that you had throughout the year. So the difference between the 1099 miscellaneous is that the 1099 miscellaneous is a period of time, and it's a net result based on the profit method that we just talked about, i.e., what you won during the year, not the cash inflows. Okay, W-2G reports gambling winnings and wagers that happen at one moment in time, and that's a big difference, and it's a big problem because you're not placing one wager during the year. A lot of the guys out there and girls out there, I mean, you guys are placing wagers, constantly, every day, $10, $20, $30. If you're an arb bettor, if you're an arbitrage bettor, you're placing hundreds, if not thousands of wagers in a week. And so the W-2G barely shows anything to your gambling situation. And I'll finish with this. And what stinks about it is that now you sent a a flare, and now the IRS says, hey, I got this W-2G, the computer is looking for it. So you have to report that amount on your tax return.
Now, can you report it as part of your business?
You can report it part of your business. You will have to, based on the tax situations, right? And based on how you set yourself up, whether it's an LLC or an S corporation, you will have to massage how you report on your tax return, because there's no direct way. I can't just put a W-2G and just put it into my gross profit and input, right? If anyone's doing TurboTax, it's gonna go haywire. Like, no, you have to put this W-2G in gambling winnings. We don't know how else to report that, right? So you have to trick the system, and there's a way you massage it where you put the W-2G, you reduce it down to 0, and then you put that same amount of winnings in your, I guess, Schedule C at this point. The S corporation would be a little bit difficult, but ultimately at the end of the day, you would say the same thing. You would enter in the W-2G, depending on your tax software, we would find a way to reduce it down to 0, saying less reported on S corporation, right? Take that money and then you report it on the S corporation. So it's a cockamamie way of getting it on there. There's no direct way. Again, this whole arena and tax situation is just, it's completely, ridiculous, to be honest.
And it also just based on my own situation, sometimes it's actually better to claim it personally than on your tax, depending on how big your business is and what you do, because maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's more beneficial to claim it on your personal 1040 as yourself, and then have your DFS stuff on the side. That's my personal situation better. But everyone, like you've said, everyone's tax situation is different, and that's why don't use me as the Jordan does it that way. It's like, only because like I'm not getting many. I got one W-2G in the past 2 years because I'm typically not betting 300 to 1 stuff to begin with, so I could file everything else that I do, and it's more beneficial on my personal. Actually, it probably ends up being the same. It's just probably like less auditable, because like my accountant Mike said that W-2Gs are never issued to businesses, so it's going to be a pretty big red flag that you're putting the W-2Gs are meant to be for people. So he just basically said it's better off just taking and he showed me the difference between how much in taxes I would pay if and it's not much of a difference, and it made him feel better. So that's my personal tax situation. But there are some people out there that, that depending on the scale, that are getting have gotten tons of W-2Gs that could equate to 7 figures. It's like, that's probably better to, find an accountant that knows what they're doing when it comes to gambling, like you guys, dfsaccounting.com. Like, if you're at that scale, don't learn from this show. Make a phone call and go to dfsaccounting.com immediately.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Yeah, exactly. And so everybody's tax situation is different, and I hope that the accountant that you're working with right now, they do a good job of analyzing this and telling you what the pros and cons and the red flags, right? Your accountant's doing a great job, and that's what we like to do. We like to sit down, we talk to you, we figure out your tax situation, and then we game plan, right? And to be honest, sometimes you're gonna have to bite the bullet on a couple situations, right? And but we do our best to mitigate your taxes, and we really just want to reduce your audit level down to 0. That's the main important thing for us, especially in this environment and these activities, is to reduce your audit risk as much as possible, because no one wants to have that over your head. So
and also you reduce your tax liability, and when people talk about taxes, it's like, oh, I'll go to hnrblock.com and I'll file everything through their little form or whatever like that. And for many people, their normal personal taxes, I think they're perfectly fine to do. That's typically what I used to do with my personal taxes. When you have a W-2 job and no outside income, you're taking the standard deduction, right? You don't even own a home, right? It's very easy that way. But for the sake of, like, once you start getting into when you're getting 5 or 6 figures a year in DFS and in sports betting, and that's actual income.
Mhm.
The amount of money that I would pay you to do this work for me, like,
Mhm.
it's probably going to be made up in the tax. Like you are probably paying more taxes than you should as it is. So whatever your
Right.
fee is, Mike, I
Yeah.
actually end up typically I end up profiting
Yeah, that's the
because
goal, right?
you did it the
Mhm.
right way. I don't get audited and I pay less
Yeah.
taxes.
Yeah, of course, right? And that's a conversation I have too, right? Hey, if I go with you, will you be able to save me taxes, and will it be more than your fee? And you hit it right on the head. There's going to be individuals out there where it's going to be easier and simpler to you file your own. And I suggest people to do that, right? Until things get a little crazy and you need to have that help. But for individuals that are out there and people that are out there, they have more complex situations, or it's just a one-time shot. We get a lot of people where they're like, I file on my own, but this year it's just a little bit over my head. Can you please help me? And we help them. We get them right for a year. We get them set up, and then they go on their merry way. Anything to help this community, right? Or anybody help pay taxes and file their taxes, we're going to do. We understand the stress level when it comes to this. We understand that this is a gray area, and this whole world doesn't make any sense, let alone getting forms called a W-2 or a 1099 miss or a 1099 interest INT. It gets a little bit cumbersome. We completely understand, and we want to help you guys and hold your hand to get you through this, so that way you don't have to worry about it till next year.
Right. We haven't even got into like the sweepstake sites because that's
Oh
handled
gosh, yeah.
differently. Right. And then also, lastly, do you guys handle like crypto stuff as well? Because I mean, I know that's a
Yeah.
gray area.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, you find yourself DFS, sports betting, and crypto, right? They all go hand in hand, especially if you're a sports bettor and you're doing offshore sites. That's the main way you're going to get funds in those accounts, right? And so that's a whole different scenario too. And you got to look at it differently, right? Just a quick for people that do offshore bets. First and foremost, just let everyone know the IRS wants you to report your worldwide income, okay? Especially when we're out here on this show, you got to report your worldwide income, even if it's on an offshore sports book. I get it. Now, so offshore sports books aren't going to be sending anything. They're not going to be preparing anything. Nothing's getting to the IRS, okay? That's my little spiel there. But when you report your income on offshore, you have to look at it in two ways, right? When you buy and purchase your crypto, you will simultaneously then you're transferred into your sports book. So you are selling it. It's a sale position. So what happens is you have a buy and sell situation that you have to report as similar to a stock, and you put that on your Schedule D. Now, say for instance you put in $5,000 and you did a really good job, and you made $10,000 in this offshore sports book. Now you have $15,000, and you want to now convert it into crypto and then convert it into fiat, right? And make sure you get that money. Well, what happens is you convert at $15,000. You bought crypto, you bought Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? Whatever the mechanism, whatever the coin is to get your money, and then you simultaneously converted it into fiat. So that's a buy-sell situation right there. It's not where you sold crypto at $15,000, but you bought it at 5, so your capital gain is 10. That's not the case. It's you bought it at 5, maybe because the market's crazy, it changes every second. So maybe you bought it at 5,000, you converted and put it in your sports book at 501, but then when you took that money out, you're at 15,000 and you converted at 1502, right? That the 15,000, the 1502 is going to be what you report as your buy and your sell. And then when you submit it, you're going to report that I bought 5,000 and I sold it for 501. That's what your capital gain is. The rest, that spread of 10,000, you report as gambling winnings, as just like everything else, and apply it to all the other gambling sites.
Not to make things
It's a
even
pain
more
in the
complex.
butt.
Right.
Yeah,
Not to make things even more complex.
Exactly.
Right? Like everything's more complex. On top of that, what we've been talking about is all federal taxes. Every state could have different tax laws when it comes to a lot of this stuff also. So it's very important, as I've said a million times already, as we get out of here, consult a tax professional. when it comes to this type of stuff. On the small, although I'm going to always recommend what I recommend. If you're on a very small scale, you're probably just take the documents, put it into your TurboTax, report it as other income, pay your 15.3%, pay whatever it is. You're probably fine. Don't ignore it, right? This is income that needs to be on your tax return. But if it's getting to the point where you feel like, oh, I really shouldn't. You've sold crypto, you've bet offshore, you have 3 W2Gs with SGP winnings, you got a 1099 from DraftKings for 50,000, but you lost 50,000 on FanDuel, so it's not like you made any money, and it's all this type of stuff in a calendar year. Don't do that. I would highly recommend you do not do this on your own.
Yeah, and likewise, right? That's a pretty complex situation, and we'd love to help you out on that. And what we do and how we do that is that we have a 30-minute, initial free consultation, right? We're getting on the phones. We're trying to do the best we can. Right now, it's tax time, so I'm processing tax returns, but we're trying to get back to people. And we just walk through your tax situation, and that's pretty much it. Give a couple pointers. Heck, I've had some people, I hear the clicking and the mouse clicking because they're preparing their tax return on TurboTax. That's fine with us, right? We just want to make sure we're helping you, and we want to get that goodwill out there in the community because, I like to bet as well. I like DFS. That's how we got into this. All right. I do season long fantasy football. I did DFS way back, got my ass kicked, and I said, all right, I'm done. Sorry, I don't know if we could say it, but I got, I'm done with that. But then sports betting, right, just took over. And that's kind of how DFS accounting and tax came about, because we knew that this community existed, and it's intricate and complex. So free 30-minute call, we touch base. We're not a hard salesmen and saleswomen, right? We would just tell you kind of what our minimums are. We built out a range, and then we just take it from there. And the people say yay or nay, and that's it.
And it's also important that you guys know what you're doing when it comes to this type of stuff, because you can get a consultation. You can go to I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky. I could call up that there's tons of CPAs in this area. And if I called anyone up for a half an hour consultation, I guarantee you, if it got to the point where I'm talking about Bored Ape, JPEGs, NFTs, and SGPs, they'd look at me and go, we've never heard of any of this stuff. They'll do the best that they can, but they'll even say to you, like, we don't even know the guidance when it comes to this stuff. You obviously do. So, so it's very important that people actually have experience dealing with, whether it be DFS, sports betting. DFS is probably, honestly, in 2025, DFS has actually become probably the easiest thing out of all this group of things to do, because it's kind of like you get a 1099. Like if you were doing freelance yard work, it would be treated kind of the same way.
Yeah, no, 100%. DFS. I mean, the DFS is what started this all, right? I mean, this is what started everyone when they came about and got really, really popular. And I kudos to the operators on this side that they've worked and done a really good job in regards to, reporting 1099 miscellaneous on time. I mean, heck, I remember a couple years back, people didn't get them. And it was like mid-March, right? And there was extensions going out. And when they got them, they were completely wrong. So hopefully they tidied that up. But from DFS, sports betting came around, right? And each state started dropping. And it's like, all right, that community expanded into sports betting. And then now we got the sweepstakes sites, right, that we didn't even get talked to about, which is even crazier because you do get a 1099 miscellaneous, but it really is sports betting. So now you're still, reporting it as gambling. The way that they report those funds is opposite than what FanDuel, right? We talked about the profit method, where really what happens during the year, your win-loss is exactly what they'll report on the 1099, doesn't follow cash. Well, from what I've seen and what I've calculated is that these sweepstakes casinos, that 1099 does follow cash, right? If you put in $10,000 and then you withdraw $5,000, right, they're going to get that net effect of $5,000. And technically that's not the case. Now, in some situations it's better, right? Because if you leave stuff in there, you're not getting taxed on that. Now, if you just do withdrawal in the next year, now you got a whole other year that you're not paying tax and you got to wait on, and you could do whatever you want for that money. So that adds another wrinkle. The crypto, I love the Bored Apes. It reminds me of a client we had that literally was an NFT art dealer, had a ton of Bored Apes. So we were working with them on that. So we've seen it all. We try our best, and we hope it, we help out people. That's what we're really trying to do, is help people.
Well, Mike Fierstein, thanks for coming on. Where can people contact you? Obviously, I've mentioned dfsaccounting.com a whole bunch of times. Do you guys have an email, contact, phone number? If people want to reach out,
we have
a 30-minute consultation.
Yeah, we have an email, right? We have a any email intake, just info@dfsaccounting.com, info@dfsaccounting.com. If you go to our website at dfsaccounting.com, there is an intake form as well. So we get those emails, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible, right? Just give us some patience. I know we're trying to do a 24-hour turnaround time just to get, respond. And then we'll schedule up a 30-minute call and just talk, and then we'll see what happens. Take it from there.
And always remember, if you're a DFS player or a sports bettor, paying your taxes is a good thing. That means you've won. And that 90% of people that do this, they don't receive any forms because they've lost. So always consider it. It is the thing that you have to pay. Don't try to avoid it. But I always, whenever I get a W-2, whenever I get a 1099 from a site or anything, I consider it good news that, at least I'm getting these forms this year, because if I didn't get these forms, I wouldn't have had much income. So thank God I have to actually pay taxes on my income, because that means I got income.
That's right. All right, Jordan. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. And I'll see you guys next Thursday for another live stream on a special edition of RotoGrinders